left, right.
So the U.S. is a free country, of course, but there are other countries that have more freedoms than we have in the United States. Here is a list of, well, more of a conversation about the freedoms that other countries have, the U.S. does not. I think you'll find it interesting. If we're missing anything, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and visit SipTalkPodcast.com and buy us a drink. This is Sip Talk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Cross this phone.
Cheers.
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 All right, we are live. Welcome to Sip Talk, episode 245. My name is Justin DiGiulio, joined by James, the Boswell Boswell, philosopher, philanthropist, philatelist, accountant, professional referee, a man of many PHs and other letter, vowel, syllable combinations. James, how's it hanging down there in sunny South Carolina?
It's good down here. Cracking open my PBR. Upset that I cannot find Molson anywhere in this town.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Raj, who unfortunately is not here to feed us your comments today. So, on that note, if you are watching us and you want to comment, you want us to see them, while Raj usually feeds us the Instagram, the TikTok comments, you're going to need to be on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch for us to see your comments. Raj was telling me today he's going to try to find some Molson in New York City, but
Shouldn't be too hard in New York City. I mean, I'm thinking about like finding some place that will ship it to me, but that's kind of difficult.
Well,
For reasons that we'll get into, actually.
I was just going to say, let me segue into our topic a little bit. The thing about New York, so in New Jersey, grocery stores and gas stations can't sell any alcohol at all. They can't sell beer, they can't sell wine, they can't sell liquor. In New Jersey, you have to go to a liquor store, which sells beer, wine, and liquor. And you're more likely to go to a big warehouse like that or a big shop that only does beer, wine, and liquor, and they'll have a decent beer selection. In New York, specifically New York City, where you can get beer at a bodega or a corner store or a gas station, because they have so much else in the store, oftentimes most of the places that retail beer aren't going to have an extensive selection. They're just going to have maybe like,
You might have like 10 to 15 options.
yeah, they're going to have like one cooler, with beer in it, and the next will be whatever else. So, but as we segue into the topic here, today we are talking about freedom, specifically internationally. But it's funny when we start talking about freedom state to state, because you were in South Carolina. South Carolina, you can buy beer and a variety of wine in any grocery store, but not liquor, right?
Correct. Liquor has to be its own thing. Beer and wine can be sold pretty much anywhere else.
Whereas in New York State, you can buy beer pretty much anywhere, but you can't buy liquor or wines. They've paired liquor and wine in New York. They've paired all three in New Jersey, and they've paired beer and wine, but not liquor in South Carolina. I don't know about the rest of the states.
But yeah, the basic idea for this topic was I heard someone talking about how United States is the most free country on earth. And I'm like, is it really though? And so like, let's think about some freedoms that other countries have that we don't.
And I think as we get into this, you're going to realize that I think most people will think, yeah, but overall, the United States has the most freedom. But I think realistically, there's a great number of countries that are pretty much just as free as the United States, with a lot of exceptions, with a lot of things that are not governed. And with our recent almost full decade of kind of crazy politics, we're seeing some major freedoms disappear in the United States. I don't know if we're seeing any new freedoms open up. The way that I look at it is the laws work like this sign on the beach. Last year, you went to the beach, there was a sign, there was 5 rules. This year you show up, they added 2 more rules to the end of the list. Next summer you're going to go, they're going to need another sign because now there's 10 rules. There's no fires on the beach. There's no glass bottles on the beach. There's no Top.
Folly Beach, no drinking whatsoever.
So in South Carolina, for that note, there were kind of three main beaches. What were they? Folly Beach.
There's Folly Beach, Sullivan's, and Isle of Palms in Charleston. Those are the three big beaches.
And Folly Beach was always kind of the most liberal. You could drink on the beach. I think in the beginning, you could, when we first moved down there, you could smoke cigarettes on the beach. Correct me if I'm.
Probably. Or if you couldn't, people still did.
But they have just the rules never go away on the beach. Okay, there's just always more rules. There's not like an annual convention where the beaches get together and like, you know what, that rule wasn't great. No, they just keep adding rules. So the rules never go away. They just keep getting added, and that's how I feel. And we'll get into these international freedoms that we don't have in the U.S. shortly, but that's how I feel about the U.S. We just keep adding laws and regulations and rules. But really, I feel like the legislative branch is stepping on the toes of the judicial branch, basically saying we're not going to allow the courts to decide case by case on the judicial side. We're just going to legislate rules. So the judicial branch is just kind of passing these through the system. They don't even.
Well, it's more like you need to look at the regulatory agencies. So probably the vast majority of rules and laws are written by the federal agencies instead of Congress directly. So think about like the EPA, the Department of Education, USDA, the list goes on, right? Those agencies are responsible for creating way more rules than Congress is, because Congress basically just delegates its power because there is so much going on and so much to regulate that Congress just doesn't have the bandwidth to do it. So they just, it ends up getting on the executive side, a lot of executive legislative authority is delegated. One thing that while you were talking about all this, and I would like to look this up, if you were to take every federal law and every federal policy and print them out and make a book.
Well, there is we get a little issue
but like
that.
how tall would that book be? And obviously this is too short. But like if you were to just like a regular book and stack those pages on top of each other, how tall would that book be?
And just for the record, there is no book of laws. You don't know what the laws are, state to state, country to country, really. But in the U.S., we don't have a list of laws. They're not taught in high school. And what's even more confusing?
Well, it's impossible. You can't teach it.
Obviously, it would be a decade-long class. You just said the book would go to the moon.
Yeah.
But the thing about
I don't know if it would go to the moon. I would like to know how tall it would be.
I don't think it would, but I think it, depending on the thickness of the paper, might make its way. But here's the issue. Here's the issue I have. Here's the issue I have with the laws. Even whether you know the laws or not, if you do know the laws, some of them are enforced at different levels. So some are not enforced at all. So like jaywalking, illegal in most places, not enforced. I recently
got jaywalking. Actually,
I recently got a ticket for texting and driving. Well, I wasn't texting. They called it distracted driving. Actually, honestly, I had just made the wrong turn like 3 times in a row. It's kind of this new neighborhood I was driving through. And in New Jersey, you can't make a left on any highways. So you have to make a series of rights. And I just kept hitting these one-way streets that circled me back around. I just had to guess when the next one was. So I went deeper and I did it 3 times. And then finally, as I pulled up to a stoplight, I opened the map on my phone just to see where the hell I was. And of course, sitting at the stoplight adjacent to me was a cop. And then he pulled me over.
So you were stopped when you had?
I was no. I was coming to a stop. I was very much in motion. But it was a bullshit ticket. He said, "No, the county is really enforcing this right now. So this is kind of like a warning shot." And it ended up being like $400 fine. Which seems pretty excessive to me. Bullshit.
I took a business law class when I was going back to school for accounting, and my B-law professor was this really interesting guy, very opinionated, but like even if I didn't agree with him, like I could tell thought went into his opinions.
Yeah, and
like he was fun to argue with. And he talked about how he's like talking about the breadth of federal law. Like he said, the average person violates at least one federal law every day.
I would not be surprised whatsoever. So I don't know if we have a lot to cover in this episode or we don't have a lot. I know it's going to be an interesting episode. Don't forget we had a pretty good brain teaser bar trivia question from last week. So we will get there about halfway through the podcast. We're about 5-10 minutes in, so about the half-hour mark. And then I got another good one I want to hit before the end of the episode. So I think you'll get some good brain teasers in this one. Either way, where do you want to start? Should we
Top
start
of the
with,
list.
Should we start with prostitution?
Yeah, we're gonna start with blackjack and hookers. We'll do hookers first.
Okay, hookers. Well, they are not legal in the United States.
With the exception of one very small area in Nevada.
How does that work? So a lot of these laws, by the way, are not federal United States laws. They're states' rights, and the states can pass these laws, but many states in the U.S. ban these across the board.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's not a federal prohibition because if it were, then Nevada couldn't get away with it. But yeah, with the exception of like Vegas and maybe like one adjoining county, like the county that Vegas is in, which is probably Washoe. But no, then Washoe's Reno.
Irregardless.
But yeah, like whatever county Vegas is in, and maybe like the adjoining county or something, it's legal. But in every other county in the United States, as far as I'm aware, prostitution's illegal. Whereas if you go to countries like the Netherlands or Australia or whatever, it's legal and regulated.
Well, it goes two ways. You have the right to sell your body. Okay, so it's illegal to sell your body, and it's illegal to pay for sex. So it's a double offense. Both parties are being fined in the United States.
So I mean, it's to me, it's a freedom that other countries have, and I can understand the argument against prostitution to a degree because maybe there's a disease risk, or I mean, is there though?
But that's the thing. I feel like if you want to give, it's a weird one because it's up to you at the end of the day. Now, obviously, it gets tricky where you have like people being kidnapped and child prostitution and forced like slavery, sex slavery. I don't know.
Which for the record, SipTalk is against.
Fair enough. But I think just an individual to go out there on the market, hang out in the corner, or not hang out in the corner, just meet somebody in line, be like, yeah, you gotta pay me.
The argument in favor of legalized prostitution would be that by bringing it into the light and having sex workers having to register and undergo regular kind of STD tests and health tests in general, is the people that are operating in that space, you're going to be combating human trafficking to some degree because the people that are working for it are going to be registered. So like if you have someone that's kind of being forced into it, like by having to go through like government registrations and stuff, that might give them a chance to like when they're interviewing with the government authority, be like, yo, I don't want to do this. This guy made me do it.
There are many things that are legal yet regulated. Okay. Driving a vehicle is legal yet regulated. One, you have to get a license to be able to do it. And two, in most states, you have to register your vehicle in every state, but then you also have to inspect your vehicle.
Not in South Carolina.
Not in South Carolina, yeah. I don't think you have to do a motorcycle inspection in New Jersey, but obviously you have to do a car inspection. But you could have regular STD tests. You could have some type of registry of these people.
In Amsterdam, they have a certificate on the wall that shows the date of their last test. And I believe they have to do it every like 2 or 4 weeks.
I think a tattoo would be better than a certificate on the wall.
I mean, tattoo.
Let's move on. I don't know. I don't have much.
1985, we were good. Asked about recently.
Well, you could be grandfathered in with your to the laws. Yeah. I'm 47. I don't have to do the tests anymore.
Just as a quick aside, have you been to the red light district in Amsterdam?
No, I've never been to Amsterdam.
So, I've been there, and the red light district is not what you would think it is, which is like just like a shady part of town where like you only go if you're trying to get like a prostitute. It's actually got like bars and restaurants and museums, and it looks like just any other part of the town. There just happens to be women up in the windows, but like families will be walking around through it. It's kind of odd, but like it's a cool part of town. And the other thing that really struck me when I was there was the wide variety of talent in the windows. Where like there were some girls, like for the record, I never purchased any services. But there were some women I was like, you're in the wrong industry. You should be a model. And there were others that are like, I don't know how you pay rent.
All right, we get it. We get to move on. Everybody has their own tastes, I think, and they're willing to spend. Weird fetishy fucks. All right, let's move on. Well, actually, the next item on our agenda here, the ability to walk around partially or fully unclothed in public. You could start with many European beaches where clothing is fully optional, and upper body covering is very much optional, and often, in most cases, from my understanding, not used. Whereas in the United States, God forbid somebody sees your nipples.
Yeah.
If a family if there's a family down the beach and you happen to, just the wind catches your bikini the right way or something, it's untied.
Yeah, Europeans on average are just much more comfortable with nudity than Americans are. Like you can have nudity on TV in Europe and like nobody loses their shit over it.
Yeah, I think we're getting there in the United States. I think recently Instagram is now allowing uh, nipples to be shown. I'm not 100% sure on that. But also like with swear words on TV, um, and since most TV is through streaming services, whereas like live broadcasts are a bit more regulated. I'm right on this, right? Do you remember? I think it was like after 10 o'clock at night, the regulations used to ease up a little bit for.
Yeah, South Park did a whole episode on that, like shit on TV, where they like
You
said
could say
shit
that,
like 400 something times to make a point. Sasha says it's legal to be topless in New York City. I think New York City is very much the exception in the
yeah,
United States.
I would guess so. Yeah, you walk through Times Square, you see a lot of topless. Well, not a lot, but oftentimes we'll see topless people. All right.
Another funny thing about Amsterdam is
What's that?
like the vast majority of Dutch people speak English quite well, but obviously they're going to speak Dutch first. But like even when they're speaking Dutch, they swear in English.
That's interesting. All right. Should we make a bit of a pivot here?
Keep on going.
Well, the pivot would be healthcare. The pivot is health.
Oh, let's talk about gambling since we said blackjack and hookers. Let's
All right, so
skip to that and then we'll work
this
back.
you have your list on the top, my list on the bottom here, and I've added some to your list. But I think gambling is a good one. Now, gambling in the U.S. is regulated state by state.
Yep.
And it regulates things like horse betting, regulates fantasy sports, regulates online access to lottery and online sports betting.
And then just regular old casinos with table games too.
And well, that's kind of the last one, yeah, and the big one because on fantasy sports, online sports betting, and online lottery are really, to my knowledge, things that have blown up the past 5 or 6 years.
That's only because they were recently made federally legal by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And the sports betting one to me is really interesting because if you had asked me 10 years ago, should sports betting be legal nationwide? My answer would have been yes. And
Why? I don't really. I'm not much of a gambler, so
neither am I.
The idea of regulating gambling, I would think, would make sense, just so idiots don't lose all their money.
Well, I mean that's kind of where I'm going, which is.
But like also, it is a kind of freedom to a degree.
Yeah, both of those would be reasons that I would have given. Is like, hey, like we should let people have the freedom to make their choices, and if they want to gamble, let them gamble. And also, like, you've got underground bookies and stuff. Why not legalize it and regulate it, and then tax it so that the state can, pay for good things for people? And now that we're in a largely legal environment for sports betting, I'm starting to think that maybe my opinion was a little bit wrong, or at least needed to be more nuanced. Because whenever
what are your issues? What are your issues currently with online sports betting?
How much it has taken over sports coverage, and I'm looking squarely at advertisers, and I'm looking at companies like ESPN. So when I was in Watertown, New York 2 weeks ago for the Eclipse, the NCAA men's final was on, right? And my mom's big into basketball. She was like, let's watch this. I'm like, all right, cool, let's do it. And so we're watching it, and we tuned in maybe like 15 minutes before tip off. And we're watching like the pregame cast, and it's ESPN, and all they're doing is talking about like the player props of like over under number of points, over under number of rebounds. I'm like, this is bullshit. This isn't coverage. This is you just talking about gambling lines. This is boring as
Well,
shit.
but
And
that's what a lot of the viewers want to see because that's
well,
their interest.
and I began to think, and I had been leading this way for a while, but if you remember, like, and you've got a book on this, like the advertisements for cigarettes and alcohol during like the 40s and 50s and 60s and
Mm,
stuff,
and a lot
and
of
how
yeah.
eventually, like especially for cigarettes, you were no longer legally allowed to advertise cigarettes at all. That like it started off a little bit, but eventually it ended up being with a total ban for advertisements on cigarettes. Tell me the last time you saw an ad for cigarettes.
I'm trying to think if I've seen a tobacco ad at all in the last like decade.
Right. And so
Yeah.
people still buy cigarettes, people still buy tobacco products, but they're not allowed to advertise. And so that's kind of where I'm leaning on the
It's a
whole
weird.
sports betting thing
Well,
is
listen,
it's become so pervasive and so toxic to
I
the sports environment that I still think it should be legal, but you should be able to regulate the advertisements and the coverage a little bit to say like, hey, you guys need to be responsible at this because you're going to be drawing in people that wouldn't have otherwise bet. And like gambling addiction is one of the most destructive addictions.
Well, look, I go through not Penn Station. I go through Penn Station. I also go through Secaucus every day. I'm part of my commute. And a couple years ago, I noticed that they started installing this massive, like every stair has some type of vinyl. What's the word? Like part of the
Yeah.
billboard. So when you're at the bottom of the stairs, you can see the whole ad.
Yep.
Every column, every big open surface has some type of advertising on it. And over the last 2 years, it has become almost exclusively sports betting. There was about 4 months over the last year that some of it was Rutgers, local college here in New Jersey, but it has since been replaced again with online sports betting, which is pretty wild stuff. That just
No,
see
they're flooding the advertising market, and
because they
things
have
like
the money to. I mean,
well, and
they
the
make
things
so much
that
money.
some of their promotions of like get your first 5 bets free or something like that
Yeah.
for is not too dissimilar from like a dealer saying like your first dose is free
Well,
because
that's the idea. You give out free tobacco products, uh, and then it's a win-win because people get addicted, which is a step down from here. Try some cocaine or heroin. It's on me,
it's the
and then
same.
you're a
It's not.
customer for life.
It's a step down,
You're
but it's the
short.
same.
You're short. Yeah, you're short
And
life from
yeah,
there.
it's for every five bet freeze that you get, every once in a while you'll get somebody that gets just cripplingly addicted, and that pays for all the other 5 bets free that you gave to other people.
All right,
And that
let's
to me
talk
that's
about
problematic.
drugs. So drugs, the legal drugs in the United States, you have alcohol, tobacco that are legal. You now have marijuana, which is legal but pretty heavily regulated.
Well, no, it is still federally illegal.
Really?
Yes, it is still Schedule 1 federally illegal. It is considered on the same level as cocaine, heroin, or meth
Wow, that's
on
wild.
the federal level. Now, the penalties for possession are lower, but it's still like when you look at like the drug schedules in terms of like
It's on
basically
the same
Schedule 1
level as
is the
heroin.
worst.
Yeah,
Marijuana is still Schedule 1.
that's wild. The
And
80s
so
remember.
basically all of these states, like the 37 states or whatever that have marijuana legal to some degree or another, are all operating against federal law. And I believe it was under Obama that like Obama instructed the DOJ to basically be like, look, if states have legalized it and businesses are operating within state laws, then leave them alone. But it's kind of like
It's
this,
weird.
like,
They didn't even repeal the law. Again,
right,
it's the rules at the beach.
right,
Okay,
yeah.
they didn't even
But
get
the
rid of the
thing
law.
is, it,
It's
it,
just like
it
we're going
it
to ignore
allows
this
for
one at the
selective
federal level.
enforcement, and that's problematic
Oh,
because then you
damn!
can have arbitrary decisions.
We just got an age restriction on. We just got an age restriction on TikTok. I think because we
Probably
talked
the
about
drugs.
the drugs. Interesting, they picked that up. I don't think we get reported. I think it just
I mean,
Okay,
that's okay.
there is a comment actually now that I'm looking on TikTok about how Portland, Oregon legalized everything. And I think
Yeah,
we talked about this. You and I talked about this last week when you were here about how it largely backfired.
well, yeah, and the problem was that they didn't take care of the second half of the equation, which is we're going to kind of decriminalize possession, but we're not going to provide support for the people that need it. And like when you get a ticket for possession or something, it's kind of like a parking ticket effectively, where like you show up to court and like with the drugs, from my understanding, which is probably a little bit off, is like if you go to court and say like, hey, here's this ticket, and like the court will be like, all right, well then go to see this therapy or whatever. But they never funded any of those therapies. So people would either just be like, you know what, I'm not paying the fine because I've got no money because I spent it on drugs. What are you going to do? Or they'd go to court and be like, well, we can't even find the therapist. So like they didn't they didn't provide support for the system. And the other thing is like, and my friend Jason made this point about Portland is like, look, you can't be drunk in public. You can't just be like walking around with an open bottle of liquor or like slumped over drunk, right? But
You can be slumped on the side of the sidewalk with no shoes on when it's 18 degrees outside, pumping yourself full of heroin,
right, and
which
so it's
doesn't
like,
make
look,
any
like we
sense.
enforce the alcohol things, like, but like being slumped over from heroin is just as bad or worse, and they do nothing about it. So
So
again, it's
let's talk about some of these other countries. You got the Netherlands that they allow marijuana and mushrooms. Germany allows marijuana. Portugal, you said practically everything is decriminalized. They handled that differently than Portland. And then Canada, marijuana is legal. In the U.S., you can home brew, but you cannot home distill.
yeah.
What was I going to add here?
But
And so,
like,
how about?
go ahead.
And here's the other thing on drugs. We're talking about alcohol, marijuana, uh, tobacco, cocaine, heroin. What we're not talking about is over the counter versus prescription medication. Whereas there are many countries where we have to go see a doctor, which, by the way, if you say, hey, I have a toothache, or how about I have some infection? I need some antibiotic. How much is it going to cost me to see the doctor? You call the doctor. They're going to say, well, we don't know. And then the doctor may have to send you to a specialist to go get something else. And then you're going to have to spend $400 alone just for the prescription,
Yep.
which is wild. So it may end up costing you $800 just to see a doctor to get a prescription and the cost of prescription. That's wild. Whereas in many other countries, you can just go to a pharmacy and you can pick this stuff up over the counter. So we have really weird laws in the U.S.
Now, when it comes to antibiotics, having some regulation
Oh,
is a good thing.
fair enough. Yeah, the overprescription of antibiotics and the uh, effectively bacteria
Yeah,
becoming
the
resistant to
antibiotic resistant bacteria is a big problem, and it's only going to get worse. So, like keeping that as a prescription only thing makes sense to me. But I mean, that kind of leads us to like the whole freedom to get healthcare.
And that's where we're going next, I think. Before we get there, I do want to give the answer to last week's bar trivia question because I don't want to forget. And I know definitely no matter what, we're going to hit medical next. So the question from last week, and I stumped a lot of people on this question. The question from last week: 3 men check into a hotel room for which they paid $30. The following day, the manager glanced at the records, realized the men had been overcharged. She gave the bellhop $5 to return to the 3 men. She gave the bellhop 5 $1 bills. On the way to the room, the bellhop decided to keep $2 for himself and gave each of the 3 men $1. This way, they paid 30 in total. They each got $1 back. The men had now paid $9 each, which is a total of $27. Now the bellhop kept the $2, and that makes a total of 29. What happened to the other dollar?
Yeah,
This
it's
stumped a lot of
misleading.
people. It's misleading because here's what happened. In no scenario would you be adding the $2 to the $27. Really,
Right.
what happened was there was $30 spent, $5 was refunded. Of those $5, the bellhop kept 2, and the guys got $1 back.
Yeah. The other way you can look at it is the guys spent $25 on the hotel room and tipped the bellman $2. They didn't know that they tipped the bellman $2.
Exactly. So effectively, they paid
27, 25 plus 2.
20. Yeah, so they paid 27, which would be $8.66 each. Right?
Yes.
I had people telling me they paid $9.33 each, but in no scenario they paid $9.33 each. They paid $30. They each got $1 back. So in total, they had paid $27. End of story. But you're not going to add the $2 to the 27. It doesn't make sense. You could, it would be like saying the bellhop had a $20 bill in his pocket, so that adds up to 47.
The reason why it ends up being misleading is because the numbers end up so close of 29 versus 30, so you're leading somebody down a path that goes nowhere.
Yeah, so effectively, they paid $30 for something that cost 25. They were refunded $3, and $2 went to the bellhop.
Yep.
Which adds to 30.
Yep.
You could rephrase it and then add the $2 to the $27, but that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you're comparing unlike categories.
If you're having trouble breaking that down,
it's like I have 10 apples. I ate 6 apples. How many oranges do I have left?
Exactly. The thing is, like, if you do this with real dollars, you can see the money on the table, and then if you just ask the question again, but the $2 plus the 27, where did the dollar go? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like I did it with T accounts because I look at accounting, and I'm just like, nope, debits equal credits, we're good.
You just, in the scenario, the $2 would never be added to the 27. It doesn't make sense. All right. We got another bar trivia coming up at the end of the podcast. Stay tuned. I think you'll like this one. But we went from prostitution to gambling to alcohol to drugs to prescription drugs to now medical care.
Yeah, so in most countries, you have the freedom to be able to get medical care at no cost.
Because there's public health care.
Yeah.
Or when there is cost, it is considerably less.
Yeah.
Do we need to? Is there a lot more to elaborate on this? I feel like maybe there isn't.
I'm just going to restate one. Socialized medicine is a problem so complicated that only 31 of the 32 industrialized nations have figured out how to implement it.
Yeah, all but the United States.
Yeah.
I got this cooler can I put some scotch into, and it's kind of leaking on me. That's not cool. All right, we got gambling, we got medical treatment. Let's see.
On the subject of medical treatment, we'll talk about assisted suicide and being able to end your own life.
Oh, I'd like that. See, we got this nice progression today. I like that. So suicide in the United States is not legal. Also, depending on how you would do suicide, could actually be harmful to others. Somebody jumped off of the I-90 bridge in Albany onto, I think it was 787 last week. How about that? That's pretty scary.
Yeah, that actually happened. That's not the first time it's happened, because I remember when I first met, when I first started dating a girl back in like 2007, someone jumped from like the I-90 overpass onto like the ground, but that 787 went under, and she talked about how like she was driving to see me and she saw the dead body.
Fuck that. That's scary shit. Was it they jumped from 787 to 787?
No, it was
the other
90. Like 90 is the highest bridge. They probably jumped from 90 all the way down to 787.
Don't you mean 787?
Oh yeah, also 787.
Sorry, a bad inside joke. I don't even know how you would explain that joke, but we just had a friend that grew up. The thing is, when you turn 16 and start driving, hang on, let me just give a little backup for perspective. When you turn 16 and suddenly have to start driving everywhere on your own, obviously this is also maybe not obvious, before GPS. So you don't have like the names of the roads just on a screen in front of you at all times. You just have to guess. Now, we had a highway that was kind of most often traveled, or one of the kind of more used highways near us, called 787.
There were 3 main highways in Albany. There's I-90, I-87, and 787.
Exactly.
We happen to live pretty close to 787, so that was an interstate that we were on a bit. We
But
had
you can
one
also
friend.
confuse 87 with 787.
Yeah, we had one friend that whenever he was on an interstate in Albany, it was 787. He'd be like, "Yeah, I got off the exit on 787 to get to Everett Road." We're like, "Dude, that's I-90." No, 787.
I just assumed he thought maybe 787 was what highways were called.
So yeah,
Uh,
every highway is 787.
so we use this inside joke, which isn't even funny.
It's funny to us.
It's funny to us. All right, but it's also confusing when somebody's telling you how to get somewhere and it's not the way to get there. Okay, actually, can we move to speed limits here? Did we touch on what we were going to touch on?
I mean, with
Oh no, we didn't touch on suicide. Let's get back to suicide. Very, very important. Euthanasia is a right.
in a lot of countries,
Well, you said Finland has suicide pods,
the recent invention.
which I guess that's some scary stuff. But
I
effectively,
mean, it's not something that you force somebody into.
well, first off, it's not legal to jump off a bridge in any of these countries. But I don't know the ins and outs. There is some regulation on it, but it doesn't mean you can just jump off a bridge or go up to the rooftop of a building and jump down.
No, like assisted suicide would be
This is
done
assisted
in a
suicide.
medical environment, and obviously you're going to have to sign a shitload of paperwork before anybody is going to work with you on this. But
Now, I'm
the
sure
idea
there's
is
some
like, look,
counseling. I'm sure there's some counseling that goes into it.
yeah, there's probably a ton of regulation, which like that makes sense. Like you want to make sure that a person is of right mind before they decide to make a decision they can't go back on. But yeah, like Finland has these suicide pods where like it's just it's a pod with like a bed or something in it, and you lie down and like you press a button and it fills with nitrogen, and you just like die of hypoxia, but peacefully, supposedly. No one's ever told me about it.
I haven't watched any videos on it. I don't think I would want.
But you can have in other countries you can have medically assisted suicide in other ways, and like if you remember Dr. Kevorkian back in the 90s, like that was a big issue in like the early 90s where a doctor would help people commit suicide because they wanted to, and he ended up going to jail for murder, even though like you can argue he was doing good.
Yeah. But the thing is, in the U.S., it's not even conversation, and it's a scary and very difficult conversation to have. But just like we were joking earlier about the liquor laws ranging state by state, it just seems kind of arbitrary to allow something one way in one place and not allow it entirely in the other place when you can witness it literally across the border going just fine.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about speed limits.
Yeah.
Because I suppose when it comes to suicides, speeding could effectively be considered a suicide and very harmful to other people. Now, in the United States, I think we had a federal speed limit.
It was 55 for a long time.
Early 90s, I think. Maybe like 95, and then it became states' rights.
Yeah, during the 70s, the 55-mile-an-hour limit was introduced as part of like the gas crisis, which led to the all-time classic "I Can't Drive 55."
Was that from the 70s?
No, that was from the 80s.
80s, yeah.
Great song, by the way.
I Can Drive 55. Who?
Hagar.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The music video is worth a watch. It is pure 80s hair metal.
I've been watching. So when I work out, I usually put on some music, and I put music videos because throw it on YouTube. Some of these 80s music videos are pretty lousy. And also,
I can't watch the music video for "I Can't Drive 55." It's awesome.
But some of the rock from the 70s and the 80s is just you see back then you didn't see the rock star as often as you do now. Now, every musician has a TikTok account, an Instagram account, a YouTube account. It's all visual. You get to see them. Back then, there was a lot of just kind of like husky mid 40-year-old guys singing rock and roll. Great lyrics, great songs. But then you look at this person, you're like, oh, that's the fella because
Steve Perry,
the sex symbol and the afro. Doesn't with the overalls on. He's a rock song. He's got that's from whatever. Uh, there's some funny looking rock stars, but good for them. Good for them.
All right, back to speed limits.
I'm not levying any judgment. So, what else is there to say on speed limits except the Autobahn?
I mean, yeah, you've got countries where you can drive whatever speed you want, whereas in the United States, there's not a single road in this country that doesn't have a speed limit.
Yeah,
we keep on going back to Germany. Like, think about this, man. Like, has any country had like as hard a reversal over the last 80 years than Germany?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Because like we talk about freedoms, and it's like United States, and then and then there's Germany.
But hey, the pendulum swings. Yeah, that who knows? Gambling, speed limits. Okay, let's hit the tough one that I'm not familiar with. This was your third or fourth one here. Actually, let's talk about. Let's go back to alcohol. Did we talk about drinking in public?
No.
So that's not a federal right, but a lot of Europe you can buy a beer and walk around.
Yep.
I don't know about other places in the world, but
like in Spain, the botellón is like one of their best things, where like people just gather in public parks and drink in a park before going out to like bars or whatever. And it's just like on a Friday night, like every park just feels like a party.
it seems very strange to me.
There's nobody gets in fights or anything. Everyone's just there having a good time talking out in the air.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some fights time to time, but it's just so common that it's not like people aren't going there to just get like ripped. But just enjoy.
I never saw a fight in all my botellones.
So the ability to have an open alcohol bottle in a vehicle, and that's why I just circled back here because we were talking about speed limits. The ability to have an open alcohol bottle in a vehicle. Now, again, this seems like there should be some judgment. If it's a Sunday afternoon and you grabbing a beer just to go from one place to the next, I don't think that's really that bad of a thing. Now, obviously, if you're drunk or you're impaired or if you have a very low tolerance, maybe not a good idea for you.
Well, here's another interesting one on DUIs. In South Carolina, let's say I've got a farm, right? And I got a lot of land. And I've got a tractor and I'm out tilling the fields or whatever. And I've got a beer in my cup holder because tractor's slow and it's boring. I'm on private property. I'm not on roads. I'm on my own land.
On your own land.
I could still get hit for a DUI.
That's wild.
It's like I can totally understand DUI laws on public roads. Not opposed to them at all.
Well, again, this is a level of regulation, and when you overregulate everything, you have to kind of err on the side of caution.
But yeah, like
there's no undoing these laws.
If you were intoxicated behind a motor vehicle, even if it's on private land, still a state law.
Yeah, if I want to mow my lawn with a beer, I don't know the.
In South Carolina, if you're mowing your lawn with a beer on a ride-on mower, that's a DUI.
That's wild. What if you take now? What if you're just driving down the street and you're hammered and you're ride-on mower?
That's also DUI.
It's also DUI. All right. Oh, before we get too far from Germany, and before we start talking about child marriage, you want to talk about prison?
Oh yeah, this is really interesting.
I didn't know this. I don't know where you stumble across.
If you're in prison and you try to escape, like they'll try and catch you, but you're not going to have time added to your sentence for it because German law considers like the desire to escape from prison a natural human condition. So like you're not going to get punished for escaping, provided you didn't harm anybody like in the process.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like in the United States, if you try and escape, like they're probably going to add like a year or something. You said, I don't know, but like, yeah, in Germany, there's no punishment for trying to escape prison as long as you didn't commit any other crimes.
All right, let's get down to brass tacks here. Speaking of which, brass tacks. Now, I'm pretty sure on this one, but I brought this up today in my office. Is it brass tacks, as in they taxed every last bit down to the brass that you had, or as a tax with an X, or is it brass tacks, as in when you're doing some upholstery and you tear everything off, what's left are just the brass tacks that were holding
second one.
The upholstery in place?
It's the second one.
And then how did that become a phrase?
I mean, you could ask that about practically any idiom.
Yeah, that was not. I don't think that was in our idiom podcast. There was a good one yesterday. I meant to write down. I forgot it. All right, child marriage. child marriage is allowed in the United States.
It's state by state, but yeah, there's a bunch of states where like with parental consent, I think like in some states it might be as young as 12 you can marry somebody off.
You need their parental consent.
Yeah, so I'm 37. In some states, if I were to go to parents of a girl and be like, I want to marry your 12-year-old, like if they signed off on it, I think I could get legally married.
Is this why you were substituting in that middle school?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, parent teacher conference day I take very seriously. That's terrible. No, it is, and it is terrible. It is terrible. And many other countries do not allow that, basically protecting the freedom of the minors. But you're saying it's state by state in the United States, and that's pretty wild. That's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, some states have made it 18, but there's a scary number of states that it's lower than that.
All right, let's hit jaywalking.
Yeah, most other countries. Well, actually, it depends because, like, when I was in Spain, they have pedestrian stoplights that are basically, like a walk, don't walk sign. But like, unlike in the United States, where nobody obeys walk and don't walk signs, at least in New York City, it's look to see if there are cars coming, then look and see if they're coming fast enough that they're going to hit you, and then cross. Where like in Spain, even if there's no cars that you can see, if you've got like the don't walk signal, people will wait for it to turn green and walk. And like I would constantly break that law because like there's no car within a quarter mile of me. Why am I going to stand here like an idiot?
Well, in New York City also, so pretty much anywhere else, if you hit a pedestrian, the driver is at fault. In New York City, if you hit a pedestrian and the vehicle has the right of way, the pedestrian is at fault.
I support that.
Well, I mean, in New York City, you have so many people, and you have. It's also, by the way, in New York City, I said this like 10 or 12 years ago. Whenever they changed, I think it was 8-10 years ago, they changed the New York City speed limit from 30 miles an hour to 25 because 25 miles an hour is a safer speed limit. And I said, oh, well, in that case, they should change it to 20. But why stop there? Why not change it to 15, 10, or 5? Because if you're only doing 5, that is very safe. They recently just passed changing the speed limits to 20 miles an hour.
Yeah, and every driver in New York City is saying, man, if I could get up to 20 miles an hour.
No, I mean, there are places in New York City where, especially when you have an open road, it's 11 o'clock at night, you're on a 5-lane road. There's nobody there. To me, pretty wild that you wouldn't be able to do 30 miles an hour.
No, I'm just thinking about the cab that we took from like the East Village to the West Village, which was probably a quarter-mile trek.
That took us like 12, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And Jessica Majeski says, "It's the people walking like holy cows for me."
I don't understand people walking like holy cows, like the tourists looking up like holy cow.
I don't know, a slow-moving herd.
Well, that's the issue with the tourists.
Yeah.
Let's see.
What other freedoms we got here?
So freedom of tax. The United States has a federal tax, but there are many countries. I think there's like 15 of them or so I have on here where there is no federal tax.
It's all local taxes?
Well, I mean, places like Antigua, Bermuda, St. Kitts.
Oh, well, you're talking about like tax havens.
UAE, Bermuda, Monaco, Cayman Islands, Qatar, Somalia. Let's see. How about travel?
Freedom to travel, yeah.
The United States, we're not allowed to go to Cuba, but there are other, what's the word I'm looking for? International regulations on travel. People that can't go certain places.
Yeah.
You know any specifics on that?
Well, and yeah, we also can't go to North Korea, but I'm not sure why you'd want to.
Are you sure you can't go to North Korea? Didn't Dennis Rodman go? I think you have. I think that's not a U.S. rule. I think it's a North Korea rule. You have to be invited.
I don't know. I'd have to research that.
Yeah. Well.
I want to get to yours because it was one that I missed that I thought was really good, and it's about voting freedom.
Voting freedom. So we had a bit of disagreement in our podcast on voting rights, whereas I saw having to have a photo ID as a pretty reasonable expectation to be able to vote. but
I still disagree with.
but the voting rights are state by state in the United States.
Yep.
But there are many countries that not only don't have ID laws, or they have different rules to vote, but they also have different types of ways to vote: proportional voting,
Rank choice.
single transferable, ranked choice, and a 2-round system. So France uses a 2-round system. If no candidate gets the majority of votes in the first round, there's a second round of voting between the top 2 candidates.
Well, when I saw voting freedom, the first thing that I thought about was the Electoral College.
That was my next point here. That's in my notes, which is very restrictive on us voting. We were talking right before we went live, I think, about how we were talking about New York and South Carolina, that really our votes don't matter much at all, because it's pretty much predetermined which way our states will go.
Yep.
And that is, of course, due to the Electoral College, because we don't have a popular vote. And
The Electoral College dilutes voting freedom for the vast majority of Americans.
Well, it means your vote does not matter, which is wild that these pro-voting groups are telling people how much their vote really does matter. But I think that message is kind of sent a little too widely. They really need to just be telling the people in very specific states how much their vote really does.
And I mean, to be realistic, it's probably between 6 and 8 states out of the 50 that are going to matter in this next election.
Well, you got what? You got Pennsylvania, you got Florida.
Pennsylvania, Michigan, Florida, Ohio, Arizona, Georgia. Did I say Michigan?
You did. That was it.
The
third one you said.
Like Wisconsin. That's 7. Wisconsin,
Yeah.
And maybe North Carolina. Maybe North Carolina.
We may see some weird shifts, because you've seen a lot of people like Texas and Florida have been inbound for a lot of people. Maybe that'll just make them redder, though. I don't know. They've left a lot of people have left New York and California, but I think that the more right-wing people have left New York and California. So maybe that just means the state is that much darker blue. But either way, it's only one shade of blue and one shade of red in most of the states.
Well, yeah, and you also
they're not very purple.
With very few exceptions, like the Electoral College, it's winner take all for a state. Like I know Nebraska actually does proportional allocation of their electors, but very few states do that.
Yeah, it's
and so you can think, like, how free are we when, like, a lot of citizens, depending on their state, their vote may or may not matter.
Yeah. So on the voter ID, I'll just run through a couple countries. In Germany, voters have to have photo ID. Ireland, voters have to have photo ID. Australia, they're not required a photo ID. They just have to state their name and address.
Australia voting's mandatory, by the way.
Is it really?
Yes.
Interesting.
It's only like a $20 fine or something if you don't. But if you look at the United States turnout figures, like for presidential elections, we're usually like in the high 40s or low 50s for voter turnout, whereas in Australia their voter turnout is in like the low 90s.
Yeah, and what about local elections and state elections?
We're like local and state elections are probably like 20 to 30% or worse. I don't know.
My guesses would be somewhere around 10. And the thing is, most people don't even know what's happening at the local election level.
I consider myself pretty informed, and when I vote for some of the local elections here, I'm just like, I don't know.
All right. Last one I want to add is in the EU, they have the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which regulates companies' right to access private individuals' data. So individuals have the right to know whether their data is being accessed and what it's being used for. Citizens have the right to rectify the data. So if it's incorrect, they can get it corrected. They have the right to erasure. So if something's online, they want it removed, they can have it removed, which is pretty wild. Also very difficult to do with the age of the internet, but it is right, and it can be enforced.
But even just figuring out what information a website has on you. So think about like your Amazon account, and think about when you open up that page and it gives you a bunch of recommendations of things that they want you to buy. That's all sourced from internal data they have on you. And
but they also save all of your browsing, anything that you've looked at.
They're looking at all of your cookies. And so like I love this. I saw it was a long time ago, but there was a post. Somebody was on Facebook and was saying like, oh, look at this, like Facebook's now giving into the gay agenda. Look at all these gay ads that are like showing up on Facebook, and people are just like, those are based on your browsing history.
That is funny. Last two, data portability, meaning you have the right to move your transfer your data from one service to another. Maybe that might be like your contact list or something. I don't really exactly know what that would be. And then privacy by design requires that the data protection measures are integrated into the design of the systems. Which is pretty interesting. You effectively have this privacy of data, which I would think of as a freedom. We totally skipped over abortion, by the way.
Oh yeah, reproductive
How
freedom.
did we not? How did we not? We're planning a whole episode on this. I mean, planning. I mean, we talked about it, but
But that's planning for us.
All right. Anything we missed? Anything else?
Well, I mean, just real quick on the abortion thing, like France just recently enshrined the right to abortion in their constitution. So you've got some countries that are like 100% protecting it. And then yeah, like in the states now it's a state by state thing, and the next state on the list is Florida voting on a state constitution amendment to guarantee the right to abortion, and that's going to be an interesting vote to watch.
All right. Let me hit because this is kind of a long one here. Let me hit our bar trivia question for episode 245. Anna Graham swerved as she skidded over the broken glass, blowing out 2 of her tires. She stopped the car, and suddenly her door was yanked open by a masked man demanding her cash. After taking her money, he ran off into the woods. Seeing a gas station in the distance, Anna began to walk. She arrived to find Clyde fast asleep in his chair. She woke him up and said, "Excuse me, mister, but I've just been robbed. I have a couple of flat tires. Can you help me?" Clyde yawned and replied, "Lady, I just sell gas, but my brother Jep owns a service station just up the way." He got up and shuffled to the phone, returning moments later to say Jep was on his way with the new tires. They arrived at her car just as Jep was installing the new tire, as Clyde has requested. Anna paid Jep with her credit card and drove to the police station to have someone arrested. Who was it? Remember, you can't answer until next week. So if you got an idea, you keep that in the back of your mind. Anna Graham got 2 flat tires after hitting some gas.
I mean, this seems obvious to me.
Yeah, I think it seems pretty obvious too. She stopped the car and the door was yanked open by a masked man demanding her cash. After taking the money, he ran off into the woods. She went to the nearby gas station, found Clyde asleep at the gas station. She said, "Can you help me? I've been robbed. I got some flat tires." Clyde said, "Lady, I just sell gas. But Jep, my brother Jep owns a service station up the way." He went to the phone. He came back and said, "Hey, I phoned Jep and he's on the way to your car with the new tires." And I went back to the car, drove immediately to the police station to have someone arrested. Who was it and why? All right,
Let's real quick greet Gilberto Juarez from Laredo, Texas.
Well, am I missing this comment here? Oh, hello, Gilberto.
You can't see it on the
yeah,
screen?
it is. I'm trying to line my eye line up.
Gilberto, what's on your mind? We got 2 minutes before we sign off.
I was going to hit this. In Somalia, the Amapala is planted. I don't know the relevance of that. Were we talking about? Afghanistan has massive opium fields. Massachusetts issued tickets, but nothing to enforce it. I think they're talking about marijuana. You know, what hit me recently was the New Hampshire state motto: "Live free,
Live free or die."
or die." And it was funny because recently I was talking about seatbelt laws in my office, and I was saying, seatbelt laws aren't really they're not really in place to protect you. The government didn't come along and say, we need to protect people. Really, what it was the insurance companies who lobbied for this law, saying that if you are in an accident caused by someone that we insure and you're wearing a seatbelt, you'll only be injured so much. But if you're not wearing a seatbelt, you'll be injured a lot more and maybe die, meaning our payout would be a great deal more. So to save the insurance companies money, they lobbied to have seatbelt laws. The only state in the United States that does not have a seatbelt law and still does not have a seatbelt law is New Hampshire. Live free or die.
I look at seatbelt laws a lot like motorcycle helmet laws.
That you'd be kind of stupid not to be wearing a seatbelt.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I told you one time I was running out of time. One time I was riding a motorcycle. Only time I rode a motorcycle without a helmet. I'm riding near the beach, doing about 10 miles an hour. All of a sudden I hear bzzz, boom, right in the center of my forehead. I got smacked by a giant bee about 10 miles an hour. Almost knocked me off the motorcycle. The last time I ever drove without a
that's the full face helmet makes such a difference. There's been times that I've gotten hit by bugs while riding. I'm like, I'm glad I had the visor down,
yeah,
man.
no shit, especially at high speed. I got to take us off air. Adios, everybody. Glad you made it this far. Please visit SipTalkPodcast.com. You can view our bar trivia questions. You can buy us a drink. You can get access to the video episodes and the audio podcast episodes. See you next time.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.